Zoom host, Lewis Ginter Botanical Garden, especially Phyllis Laslett and Megan Compton, who also handled registration for our 2,800 plus audience. Our facilitator tonight is Nancy Veers, president of the Virginia Native Plant Society. Helping our speaker to respond to as many of your questions as is possible tonight will be Margaret Fisher with the Plant Nova Natives campaign, along with Anna Maria Johnson with the Natural Garden, Stacy Moulds with the Virginia Department of Transportation's Pollinator Habitat Program, Beth Mizell, Blue Ridge Prism, and the Plant Natives campaign, and Emily Byers with the Virginia Native Plant Society's Jefferson chapter. I also want to thank the many Plant Virginia Natives partners who helped to plan this event. And finally, thank you to our audience. Without your participation, this webinar series would not be happening. So I want to turn the mic over to Nancy Veers, and Nancy will be our MC for the evening.
Thank you, Virginia. Hi, I'm Nancy Veers. I'm the president of the Virginia Native Plant Society, and I'm very pleased to be your host here. I'm coming to you from a field of bluebells, a little past blooming now, but I can keep them up virtually. There's a little bit of housekeeping that we need to keep in mind, and so I'm going to turn this over to Phyllis, who will explain that process to us.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to share my screen just to make things a little bit easier to explain. And so bear with me for a second, folks. I got distracted by the storms. So here we are. Just a little etiquette for using this Zoom webinar format. Just a minute, folks. I apologize. If you hover over the bottom of your or the top of your Zoom screen, you will see that there are options to use the Q&A format, and that's what we're going to ask you to do tonight. There are a lot of you in this program. We can't answer every chat. We can't and we can't respond to raised hands because at this point there are 650 of you in this call. So if you would please use the Q&A function. We have, as Virginia mentioned, we have a wonderful panel of people who are going to help manage the Q&A section, and we will get to as many questions tonight as we possibly can. And I'm going to turn this back over to Nancy. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Phyllis. I'm now very pleased to introduce our speaker tonight. John Magee has been designing and building landscapes in the Washington, D.C. metro area and beyond for the past 25 years. After receiving his BS in agriculture from Ohio State University and spending a few years training and showing horses, John settled down in the industry as the general foreman of Pennsylvania's highest award-winning landscape firm. While in Pennsylvania, he became a volunteer at Hawk Mountain Sanctuary, and not only did he meet his wife there, but he was introduced to habitat gardening and the use of native plants in the landscape. He operates his own award-winning design firm called Magee Design in the beautiful Middleburg countryside. John enjoys kayaking and the proverbial taking long walks with his wife and dog. He's been associated with the Cullowhee Native Plant Conference. That's essentially the granddaddy of all native plant conferences. It started way back in the 80s, and it will be in its 37th year this year. It will be held virtually in July. So John is coming to us live from Dolly Sods, West Virginia. So Please take it away, John. Thank you for being with us.
Well, thank you, Nancy. That was a nice introduction. I'm not really in Dolly Sots, but I wish I was, and we'll hopefully be back there again this weekend. But thank you all for joining us this evening. I'm not used to speaking to this many people at one time, and so I'm a little nervous. But when, as you guys have been holding these, I listened to Janet's and I listened to Celia's talk, and you know, it was funny that Janet had at the beginning her presentation said that it's tough to give presentations these days because you don't hear the audience reacting, and so it's a tough thing when you tell a joke and nobody laughs to have a fun time doing it. So so I've made up a set of rules for us to follow here. If I can, so you know, virtual symposium ground rules, you know, please laugh. Please go ahead and laugh. I'm going to feel terrible if I know that nobody's laughing out there. Chewing gum is okay if you're muted. And since all the participants are muted, you're covered there. Please applaud when, if necessary. And please don't hate me if I mispronounce a plant name or misspell a plant. I do everything just from memory. I don't look it up. So I may have a few boo-boos in there. If I forget your favorite, whatever, I'm sorry. And if I'm running a little late, that's me. So those are our ground rules for tonight's symposium. But we're going to be talking about the right plant in the right place. And I thought this was an appropriate picture to start with. This is a project we did out in Front Royal back in the early 2000s. And I remember the lady who owned the house coming out and saying, you know, what would you do with this? And I said, well, almost anything, because there's just not a lot there. And what I told her we would do first off is get rid of this bank that they didn't have, so they wouldn't have to mow it. You know, they had a 15-year-old son at the time, and he liked to play baseball up here on the more level area, and so we didn't want to take that away from him. But you know, why mow grass where you don't really need to have grass? And that's where we came up with this combo of things that kind of bloom all through the year and do different things. And you know, these days you're seeing more diverse plantings. You know, we're going to talk about working in layers a lot throughout this. We're going to talk about seasonal interest. One of the biggest comments that I get from homeowners is that every day they go out in their garden, something's different. And a lot of times that's very true. I don't know about every day, but it happens a lot. And then conjunction junction, what's your function? You know, when I was at Ohio State, we were taught ornamental horticulture, which meant that you looked at it from a distance. It was not a participatory plant. You know, if something ate your plant back in the 80s, you freaked out and put whatever pesticide you could on it. Today, we're doing a little better with our management of such things, and we're actually trying to landscape for insects. So we'll get into that in a moment. But first, I thought I'd start us out with where we are. And the reason I'm doing this is because this is a new project on our books from a couple weeks ago. And this is a neighborhood here in Northern Virginia, and they've asked us to redo their plantings. This is a landscape that's 20 to 30 years old. And, you know, I call these the consummate mustache plantings. And, you know, you see these on houses. This is one of their community centers. And of course, you've got a row of shrubs over here. You've got a row of shrubs over here. And then, you know, basically those shrubs are pruned into a box. And, you know, the maintenance guys come every week and do a little weeding and a little bit of pruning, and that's pretty much it. And so this doesn't really serve any ecological purposes. and you know, that's what we're trying to get away from. And this neighborhood, uh, what I would tell you is that, you know, since it's 20, 30 years that this landscape has been in, and since it's been, you know, let's say butchered and abused for the last 20, 30 years, the plants are starting to die. You know, they only have so much energy, and so their energy is running out. And luckily the neighborhood had the foresight to go, well, hey, you know, this is an opportunity to kind of upgrade our plantings and do something new. And so as I was walking around, I just started taking all these notes and kind of going, gosh, why, well, you know, why are we doing these things? And you know, so we're looking at we're looking at a landscape that requires high physical maintenance. And so you have to have some strong young people out there, you know, ripping and tearing and doing the things that they need to. Unfortunately, landscaping work is not always thought of as high dollar wage stuff. And so a lot of times you end up with low wage workers. And this is really driven by the consumer. You know, I know myself, I'd love to, you know, hire 4 or 5 people who, you know, are well trained in pruning and, you know, horticulture and all these things. But unfortunately, not a lot of people want to pay much for maintenance. And so unfortunately, you end up simplifying kind of the skill set of people, and this is where things get pruned into a box. And you know, we're burning a lot of carbon doing it because we're using carbon-based fuels and weed whackers and hedge pruners and leaf blowers and whatnot. And the worst thing of all is that we're not really managing the water that goes through these properties very well either. You know, instead of kind of cleansing them and collecting them and watering the plants with the water that comes onto the property, we, for the last 50 years, we've been doing everything we can to get water off the property as quickly as we possibly can. And that unfortunately has led to some problems in the Chesapeake Bay and our tributaries and whatnot. And then of course, this really doesn't provide any habitat for wildlife. And you know, this, where this neighborhood is 20, 30 years ago was either forest or meadow or farmland. And now it's a bunch of non-native plants that really don't do anything for the environment. And that's not a good way to go. So a couple of practices that I noticed while there, you know, these are crepe myrtles that are planted. This is their swimming pool. So I couldn't hop the fence and get better pictures, sorry. but you know, this is what we call crepe murder, because this is not how you should prune any tree. But of course, if you have low dollar labor with minimal training, and you're training them basically to do this, that's what they're going to do over and over again. And you know, we're planting non-native invasive species in common areas with these grasses. These are miscanthus grasses in this picture. Below the crepe myrtle, we've got some knockout roses and some yews. Again, things that really don't mean anything to wildlife or anything around us. If you look over to the right, this is a hillside of viburnum that I came across. And of course, you know, it's like they pruned it with a chainsaw or something. And I'm sure it was head shears, but it's just really butchering this plant. And you know, they probably don't have the budget worked in to their HOA management that they should to get some higher end workers out there. But again, this, you know, an HOA might have a clause that they have to take 3 bids from 3 different companies, and they may have a clause that says they have to take the lowest bid, which, you know, if you take the lowest bid, then you're just ensuring yourself that you're probably going to get the worst service or the least amount of service. And so you're going to end up with things like this. And you know, all my guys know that if they leave these sticks on here, that part of the plant is going to die. And that's where diseases and insects enter into these shrubs. And I don't know what horticultural school these people went to, but viburnums are not a box. They're not, these are viburnum, and they're not meant to be pruned into this consistent looking thing. They're supposed to be beautiful shrubs. They're supposed to be able to grow and do their thing. They're supposed to be 15 to 20 feet tall. And for some reason, somebody made the decision that these would be 6 to 7 feet tall. And so they're maintained at that. And so what happens is over time, these plants use up all their energy just trying to recover from this damage, and they die. And that's what's happening in this neighborhood at the moment. And so we're going to put together a better plan for them. We're going to put together some better management practices for them, and we'll see if we can't get things to improve a little bit. HOAs are tough because they're their boards change and their priorities change, and things happen. But it'd be nice to get some good landscaping in there, that's for sure. And this is what we see at people's homes, and this is kind of what human beings understand is, I know that if I go out and I prune this into a little ball, well, then I did something, and I did something, and my landscaping looks nice. I mean, this house looks nice. It presents well. If I was a realtor and I was wanting to get some pictures to put this house up for sale, I'd be like, yeah, that looks fine. And at least they're not murdering their crepe myrtles here. They're trimming them more like trees. But again, you can kind of see where everything kind of has the hand of man to it. And of course, if you're going to have a lawn that looks like this out front, you might be obsessing a little bit too much about your lawn, and you might want to let it go a little bit. Either that or just paint it. It's probably easier. But then, kind of along came a movement 30, 40 years ago, as Nancy was saying, the Cullowhee Native Plant Conference is in its 38th year. And so 40 years ago or something, some people got together and said, why are we doing what we're doing? And why are we putting in all these non-native plants that mean nothing to the environment and pruning them into boxes and doing these things? And so people started planting more native plants. And I will tell you, I have kind of a loose definition of what native, native to me doesn't refer to geography. It doesn't refer to state lines or anything like that. It refers to evolution, and, native plants evolve together with the other fauna in the landscape. And so, and we're in a time at the moment where that's greatly changing, with climate change, with deforestation, with habitat loss, all these things. We've really, really changed the environment here. I'm going to talk about North America and the United States, but we've changed the environment in pretty much every country around the world. And again, we've kind of gone in and replaced all of it with non-native landscaping plants that don't mean anything. So that's my boy Chewy there. You can he's a very good dog. You can tell he's the best dog in the world. I'll just say that right now. But but suddenly people started caring about insects. And my buddy Mike Berkeley and I, when we started the Native Plant Podcast, we were talking to Doug Tallamy on a show, and Mike brought up the fact that I was a kid in the 70s, and Mike was a kid in the 60s, and we both can remember going to the gas station and having to clean the windshield of your car off. Like every time you stopped for gas, you had to clean your window because there was bug splatter all over your car. Well, now I can drive from here in Northern Virginia to Columbus, Ohio, and not need to clean my window. So that's not a good thing. A lot of people might think, oh, good, we're getting rid of bugs. It's not a good thing. We're getting rid of little fellows like this ebony jewelwing damselfly here. And we want to see these things more in our landscape. They're beautiful. Look at the color on this thing, and you can tell it's a female by these little white tips up here, which is really awesome. And it's on the tip of a native rhododendron right outside of my office. So it's a good thing to welcome insects back into the land. Diversity is becoming more important again. And again, you know, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, we did those mustache plantings like I showed you in the beginning there, where you just put a line of yews. I remember growing up, I grew up on a farm, and the only thing I knew about landscaping was that, you know, once or twice a year, I'd have to go out and trim the hedges in front of our house. And now, instead of talking about hedges, we're talking about planting matrices, which are more complicated associations of plants. We're talking about working in levels. We're talking about, you know, having diverse native plantings. We're talking about having lots of bird food in the landscape. We're talking about how important it is to have lots of pollinator food in the landscape. And we're talking about food chains. You know, if we want to keep our food in the landscape, then we have to keep these pollinators happy. If we want to keep the pollinators happy, then we have to have landscapes that look like these in front of us. So, you know, ecological services is really, every landscape should be focused on its ecological services. You know, yeah, we all want to have a pretty landscape. We all want to have a walk out our door and have this curb appeal, but there's no reason you can't do that and also have ecological services functioning in your landscape. This is a red admiral butterfly on a black-eyed Susan in my yard. And so we can feed the butterflies, we can clean water, we can provide habitat, we can clean the air, and we can enrich the soil. These are all things that we haven't been doing for a long time, and we still have a long ways to go. But thank goodness to seminars like this and all the people attending. You know, times have changed a lot. When I started doing this 30 years ago, there would not be 800 people tuned in to hear me speak about butterflies and native plants. But you know, times are changing, and you know, one of the biggest changes that I've seen just in the last 20 years are rain gardens. And rain gardens to me always made sense. You know, it never made sense to me why we were trying to get water off our property as soon as we possibly can. And I know people are afraid of mosquitoes and whatnot, but you know, this picture here to the left shows you kind of what a rain garden looks like the day you finish. And you know, we've got this little depression right in here. That's where water can collect and hold for a minute. You can see up in here, there's some downspout pipes that come off of the roof of this house, and they're piped back here to the back of the property so that they can go into here. And to the right here, you can see it actually functioning, where you've got the water coming out of the pipes, you've got water standing in the rain garden, and then you've got plants that are drinking it up. And so, you know, we're collecting our stormwater runoff. We're letting it sit on site for a moment. We want to make it pretty. And I'll show you some more pictures here in a second that might make it look pretty. You have your own source of water most of the time, you know, so you don't have to worry too much about watering. And we all live downstream from somebody. And so think about that as you're landscaping around your yard, that you want to protect that downstream flow, and you don't want to be the guy dumping the oil out in your backyard. You want to be cleaning the water as it goes through your property. We just had the lights go out here. Sorry. You know, gardening is patience, and it may take a year or two for your rain garden to fill in, or any landscaping to fill in, but it'll do so. Don't worry. You know, this is bone set here in front of us, Eupatorium perfoliatum. it may have been changed from Eupatorium. I'm not sure at the moment. In the background here, we have our marshmallow hibiscus machutos. I think there's some more. That's probably mountain mint in the back there, Picanthamum muticum. And so we just, we've got a diverse plant set of native plants in here that are cleaning the water, feeding our pollinators. The hummingbirds love these hibiscus. So lots of good things brought out in these plantings. And so you see, let me back up 1 second. So this is the first year past planting. And so you see we've got some mature plants, but it's not filled in, it's not full and lush. And then the following year, and this is towards late summer when this picture was taken. You can see the bone sets in bloom here. The hibiscus is still in bloom, but a lot more of them. Bone set's a really great plant for spreading around the garden. You've got some switchgrass back here, Panicum virgatum. We've got some river birch, and then there's a little bit of a knoll up here, so we had to change the planting selection so that it could handle more dry land. And so we've got some monardas up here. These are non-native hydrangea, but it was something the client requested, and it's not an invasive species, so we put it out there. And if you've listened to Doug Tallamy talk about how many natives you should have in your landscape, he uses the number of about 70%. If you're doing 70%, then we're probably going to be okay. This garden is more like 90-95%, but it does have one or two things in it that are not native. So here's a little more close up of the bone sweat on the other side. There's some hardy ageratum back here. So again, this is a late summer garden getting ready to get on its fall color. But a lot of ecological services there. You're cleaning the water, you're feeding a lot of pollinators. There's a lot of bird food here. There's mammals that are moving in. There's rabbits that move in, of course. And then when you get rabbits, you start to get hawks and eagles and different things that prey on those little mammals. So it's bringing life to your neighborhood or bringing life to your house. So here's button bush when it's in bloom. I think this is a very underused bush in the landscape. It to me is the indicator that we should have butterflies. Every year I get people who call and say, I'm not seeing any butterflies. I'm not seeing any butterflies. Well, when buttonbush starts blooming and when bottlebrush buckeye start blooming, that's when you should start seeing a lot of butterflies going around. And then again, over here's our switchgrass. We've got some rattlesnake master where this starts to be a hill, and that's a plant that can handle quite a bit of dryness. We've got some little blue stem mixed in up here as well, and then of course our monarda. So I wanted to talk to you about HOA common areas. As I said in the beginning, we're working with a community in Ashburn to update their plantings. This is another HOA that we worked with previously and did a couple of common areas. They can be a good source of biodiversity instead of just a lawn wasteland. Do we really need to mow everything we mow at HOAs? And, it was funny because when we started building this, we went in and lifted all the grass out of this area, and immediately someone came out and objected and said, oh, you can't get rid of our grass. Where are my kids going to play? And I said, well, what do they play? And they're like, well, not much really, because they don't even really go outside that much. And I'm kind of like, well, why are you complaining to me? But she wanted a place for her kids to play soccer, and I certainly understand that. I played sports when I was a kid, and I enjoyed it. And but there's probably 11 or 12 acres of lawn right around this little garden. And so if we want to take out a couple 100 feet and put it in the pollinator garden, I think that's probably okay. And I don't think the grass people should object too bad for losing a little bit of their grass, but people do. And you have to respect everybody's opinions in an HOA. And that's one of the biggest concerns. So again, this is the first community that contacted me, and they have 5 lakes in their community, and they wanted to create some pollinator habitat around their lakes. And they talked to a different company first, and this is what they did for them. And I know you can't see that picture really well, but it's basically your landscaper's dozen. It's knockout roses, mop cypress. There is some itea in there, which is a native. The cattails, kind of native. But again, there's nothing ecological going on here. There's certainly no pollinator habitat, and that's what this firm was hired to do, was put in pollinator habitat, and they totally missed the boat. But what was funny to me, the thing I noticed was, as I was walking around this lake to kind of inspect what they had done previously, I noticed that nobody who borders that lake goes outside. The lake is over here to my right, and there's no patios. Nobody's built a patio under here. Some people have some deck furniture, but maybe 1 or 2 people were grilling outdoors, and they weren't really doing anything else. We've got your obligatory Bradford pear here, of course, and a Russian olive underneath it. It's like the 2 poster children for what you should never do in a landscape is plant those 2 plants. But they did, 30, 40 years ago, or maybe not that long ago, but 20 years ago, when they were building this community, they put in these trees and shrubs. But it's anti, people just don't go outside because they don't want to see it. There's nothing out there for them to participate in. So this is Tippecanoe Lake, and this is in Ashburn Village, and you actually can go see this. There's a jogging trail right here that if you wanted to, you can go and just do a little self-touring of yourself. But we've got it blooming in different seasons. We've got different mixes of layers and things. This white plant here is Culver's root, Veronicastrum virginicum. We've got some purple cone flowers. We've got some Amsonias through here, but we tried to plant things in kind of sweeps. We've got the bee balm and butterfly weed blooming together here. The reason we did this in sweeps was that we thought it would make it easier for another company to maintain. That was wrong, of course, because these are all plants they've never seen before, and except maybe the purple cone flowers. And to them, it was all weeds. And so a lot of this got weed whacked. And again, this is where working with HOAs, you got to kind of have everybody on board. Become active in your landscaping committee if you want to see stuff like this on your property, or in your HOA. This is another garden that we did out there, and it blooms all summer long. This is a rattlesnake master here in the foreground. We've got some anticyssip blooming in the back. We've got some cassia back here. Over to the left here, this is our Monarda fistulosa, or bergamot again, and we've got some down here to kind of tie things together. But I'd rather go through my HOA in the summertime and see stuff, have stuff like this to look at, than to just be looking at grass and spent azaleas or Russian olive. But the biggest change that I started to notice once, this is Tippecanoe Lake out here. The garden I was just showing you is all along this bank here, and here's our jogging trail I was talking about. But I showed up the one day, I think the second, maybe the third summer, and started to notice that people were starting to garden in their backyards. And it was really quite dramatic. Everybody was putting in patios. everybody was buying lawn furniture to put outside, and they even had more fishermen come to the lake to fish, which was you know, a bit of a problem because they were walking over our plants on a way to do it. So we cleared them a couple of trails to have access to the lake, and they now do. But you know, it's kind of become owned by these people who live along it, which is really a nice treat. So one of the biggest things that one of the biggest reasons we want people to landscape with native plants is to create habitat. You know, if you're living in a subdivision that probably used to be a forest, and somebody came along and mowed down the forest. I had some clients who live in Willisford, which is a neighborhood near here, and they were, I don't know if it was Willisford that was doing this or it was the next neighborhood over, but they were clearing for the next set of houses. And I went to see my client the one day, and they were just in tears because they said it was like the worst Disney film they'd ever seen, where, you know, like the raccoons and the possums were all running out of the forest to escape the bulldozers. And sure enough, that happens every day in Northern Virginia, and happens every day around Richmond, where we're mowing down forests and we're putting in houses. And then to add insult to injury, we're replacing that native forest with non-native invasive species, like the Bradford pear and Russian olive and those kinds of things. So we want to replace the habitat. You know, I get it, people need a place to live. We can work with the builders on save areas and, you know, having some habitat and some green space and all that stuff. But you know, the whole backyard national park movement that Doug Tallamy started, to me, is this great idea. And you know, people say all the time, you know, well, what can I do to make the world a better place? Well, start in your own house. So this is a barred owl that is living at my house. We've named him Raoul, and he showed up, you know, last fall, I think, and we've been seeing him on a very regular basis. And we'll take another visit with Raoul here in a minute. But you know, Raoul's kind of the end product of habitat. You know, you're not going to get an owl first. You've got to get other things first. You've got to get some insects, and then you get some birds, and then you get some mammals, and then you get some Raoul showing up. But you know, a good thing to do when you're planning a native plant garden is to work in layers. You know, landscapes that are built in layers have much more vertical movement and interest, but don't block the small stuff with the big stuff. You know, work in layers, short stuff in the front, tall stuff in the back. There's always exceptions to rules because, you know, I'm kind of famous for having some exclamation point coming up out of the landscape to go, you know, here I am. You know, I know all my buddies are in the back of the border, but I'm going to be in the front. And so, you know, have fun with design. Don't be afraid to do something wrong. But work in layers. You know, you can see here early summer with the bee balm blooming and the butterfly weed, and then later, you know, as we saw before. But you know, I kind of like this horizontal look of the purple coneflower with the vertical look of the culver's root a lot, and it's kind of a cool thing to have out there for people to look at as they're going down the jogging trail in the morning. Massing is another thing that people do to make a real statement. This is Picanthamum muticum, or mountain mint, and it's grown on a really dry hillside. You know, grass probably could not grow here. And mountain mint is an extremely aggressive ground cover. You know, this planting, as we're seeing it, is 3 years old, and we started it with plugs, which are just tiny little plants that you can get from certain nurseries. And it took off and did its thing. And you know, that beyond the fact that you've got all these flowers in here and all these pollinator food, you also have cover, you know, because underneath here, rabbits can hide, they can hide from the hawks, different things like that. You know, songbirds can build their nests in there and everything. And we want to be planting more diversity and doing, sorry, you know, doing, you know, we don't want to be doing hedges anymore. We want to be doing matrices of plants. You know, we've got elderberry shrub here on the right, which is one of my favorite fruits. And then we've got a mix of perennials through here. We've got some liatris, I think that's pycnostachya, again with the purple cone flowers. And again, you know, purple cone flower is not exactly native to Virginia, but a lot of people kind of accept them because they have a lot of pollinator value to them. Again, I don't get crazy picky about that kind of stuff, but I try. One of the other things I wanted to talk to you about with regards to what native plants do, one of the biggest things is managing stormwater runoff. And again, back in the day, we were grading our land so that all that water just ran right off our land and right into the local stream. And in the process, we were treating it with chemicals and insecticides and all kinds of stuff. And that was just running off and running down into the stream. And that's not a good thing. This is a client down in Springfield, and they wanted to be able to grow grass. And so they called me, and I was there to actually look at giving them a price on a patio. And we started talking about their landscaping because they'd had 4 or 5 different companies come out and do landscaping for them, and they weren't happy with any of them. And I can understand why. You know, here's Liriope, but the funniest thing about this project to me is this, you know, they said to everybody, well, we want to be able to grow grass here. Well, this is very wet and it's in full shade. It's in a forest. And it's not in a forest, but they have a lot of large mature trees on the property and in the neighborhood. So a lot of shade, not, you know, if you know anything about horticulture, that's not where you're going to grow grass. So, you know, they constantly had mud here. You know, it wasn't functioning well. You know, conjunction junction, what's your function? Well, it's not working. So we took all that out of there. And the funny story was that when we were lifting out those curbs that you saw, the guy who put them in stopped by and started yelling at me, you know, that I was destroying his work and his masterpiece and all this stuff. And I was like, gee, sorry, I didn't know what I was doing. And I kind of act dumb sometimes. And I just was like, I'm just here. I'm doing my job. I was told to rip these out. Sorry, you'll have to bring it up with somebody else. And the guy stomped off and we never heard from him again. But I'm sure he's putting in curbs somewhere else. But what we did was we put in a hard surface of steps. Now this is kind of an expensive option, but you can do other things. You know, you can do something as cheap as putting down mulch to walk through here, or a gravel path. But this is our native Pachysandra over here on the right hand side. This is Pachysandra procumbens, also known as Allegheny spurge. And so all that water that comes down off of that hillside has to go through these plantings. On the other side, we've got green dragon, which is Erythema draconidum, and a cousin of Jack in the Pulpit. Jack in the Pulpits would do well over there as well. We've got some bloodroot down in here. And then we've got some ginger. We've got some drains along the way here that, you know, we kind of funnel water into to carry it through the garden. And if you've ever walked along a native creek, you'll notice that there's a lot of our native ginger that grows in that kind of habitat. And so we put it in there to cleanse things as it's working its way through. Now, if you walk around up behind their house, they were telling me their house is over on this side, and they were telling me they were getting water in their basement. And, you know, I told them they might want to point their downspout a different direction. And so what we did, I'll show you in a second, but while we have view of it here, we put a hard surface in here where the grass is, because the grass wasn't doing anything. And we have a drain collection area right in front of this building that this downspout now goes into, and then empties out into a rain garden on the other side. But you can also see there, this was all English ivy up here. And so they hired somebody local to rip all that out. And so, English ivy doesn't control erosion. It doesn't really do anything with stormwater. It just kind of runs through it and runs past it without serving any purpose. So this is afterwards. Here's our hard surface of flagstone. You could do a permeable surface. A lot of people will. In this case, because of the issues with the foundation, we wanted to direct the water to where we wanted it to go. Not only that, but we increased the diversity of plantings up here. We put a couple of ground covers up on this hillside. And I usually will just tell people to try 10 or 15 of a certain plant and see how it does. And so in this case, we tried black-eyed Susans, crested iris, phlox stolonifera, the woodland phlox, and you can see right here, this is Eurybia divaricata, or what used to be Aster divaricata, the white wood aster. And that is actually the plant that took over and became the dominant species on the hillside. Down here, growing below, we've got golden fleece solidago, which is a cultivar. Again, I don't get as picky about cultivars, but if you're wanting to do a pure native garden, I respect that. And that's not the plant for you, but you can still get the straight species of this. And but goldenrods are really important for monarchs during the fall migration and getting home. So a good plant to have, and they do not cause hay fever, in case you're thinking that. Their pollen's very heavy. And if anybody tries to tell you that, just take them over to the plant and point to the ground, and you'll see yellow pollen laying on the ground because it's so heavy it doesn't go airborne. So it's ragweed that actually causes your hay fever. So this is over on the other side. This is before they had ripped out the English ivy, and you can see it just basically covers everything. So no diversity, no life support, no storm cleansing, invasive species, just the nightmare of all nightmares for a guy like me. And of course, this beautiful curbing that the guy put in. And again, you see with the same results of the grass. So again, we took all that out and did a more diverse planting back here. There's black cohosh back here. There's maidenhair ferns, there's lady ferns. These are crested iris down in the front, crested iris over on this side with some lady ferns mixed in. We built this dry stack stone wall. There's no mortar in this wall, so that, all that water has to go through here and filtrate, and then it hits the back of that wall and has to kind of work its way through the sponge, so to speak. And we did some big boulder steps to go through the garden. Again, that's kind of an expensive solution. It's beautiful. And once you put those puppies in place, they usually don't go anywhere. So it's a nice thing to consider. But again, it's on the high side of expensive to do. And then out in front of their house, this was what 3 different companies had come up with. Excuse me for a second there. But this is one company's work. The second company did some work up in here, and then a third company had done all of this. We kept this part of things, and we kept these Hinoki cypress that are by the door because they're nice bushes and they don't spread by seed or anything. But again, they were getting water into their foundation, and so we tore all this stuff out up here, which was, I think it was like a gravel patio. And it's now mortared flagstone. And again, we did mortared in this case because we wanted to make sure nothing was getting into their basement. And so the patio is pointed to drain out away from the house, and it's pointed to drain down towards these walls. And I'll show you here in a minute. This is a big rain garden. And so all the water comes sheeting across this patio, goes through this wall, which diffuses some of the force of the water, and then gets soaked up with the plants that are in here. And then once again has to go through another stone wall. Then it goes down the driveway, goes down the road and into 4 Mile Run. This is down in Alexandria, Virginia. And you know, they're now cleaning. This is the final picture. And they're, you know, they're now cleaning their water as it comes across here. This is where all that pachysandra was. So, and those steps. And so that's all getting cleaned. This is, you know, this isn't cleaning anything, but it's directing the water to another cleaning point. And again, this isn't, you know, it's not like this isn't a beautiful landscape. It's a beautiful landscape with a lot of curb appeal, but it also does a lot of ecological function to it. So we've got hay-scented fern growing in here, Densitatia punctiloba. We've got some Barbara's buttons, which are an endangered species, Marshallia grandiflora. We had to have a CITES permit to have that plant. I forget what else we've got in the back here. But again, these are all plants that serve a lot of ecological functions and do things. They're participatory landscapes. And of course, the main reason we seem to be landscaping with native plants is due to the pollinators and the importance of saving our pollinators. And we're losing a lot. Like I said, you know, when Mike was pointing out to Dr. Talamy the fact that he doesn't have to clean his windshield anymore, you know, this is a monarch butterfly caterpillar. And, you know, that little caterpillar there, this was in Round Hill, Virginia, and he's got to make his way all the way down to Mexico. And he's going to need food and shelter and, you know, pollinator habitat the entire way if he's going to make it, or she, whatever it is. But, you know, pollinators are very tied to evolutionary chains. You know, a lot of us know the story of the monarch and milkweed, that they're tied together. This is what monarch babies eat is milkweed. Zebra swallowtails eat pawpaws. The Baltimore checker spot, I think, is turtle heads. You know, if you're an entomologist, you can go down and kind of name off what the native plants are that feed our pollinators. But you know, if you lose this pollinator, like honestly, we may see the loss of the monarch butterfly in our lifetime. Well, what happens then? Well, if you lose that pollinator, then the things that pollinates are not being pollinated, and so we have what are called trophic cascades. And you know, you lose this piece of the puzzle, and then a couple of other pieces of the puzzle fall out because nothing's holding them in place, and it can really lead to some long-term damage, which we don't want to do. We want to rebuild the landscape. This is spotted horse mint on the left, which is Monarda punctata. Beautiful biennial that, you know, you can put out in your landscape, and once it's gone to seed, you know, spread the seed around a little bit and you'll keep it in your landscape. But it is a short-lived plant, so remember to do those things. Over here, we've got some mountain mint going on, and you know, you see a lot more life in this landscape. There used to be grass underneath here, and so again, here's one of our native dogwoods, again with the working in levels and layers kind of thing, and having different things blooming at different times. And if you do that, you'll get these guys, you know, tiger swallowtails pollinating a Silphium perfoliatum, or a cup plant. This is a great spangled fritillary up here on butterfly weed. And I'm not sure what this guy is. Sorry. If somebody who knows, maybe type that into the chat. I want to say it's a lesser skipper, but I'm not positive. But this is common milkweed that it's on. And common milkweed is really not planted at all in the landscape. And you know, I understand it's kind of weedy, it's kind of a wild plant, but it is one of our most fragrant native plants. And you know, all the people who garden for fragrance, I don't know why you're not putting in common milkweed as one of the most fragrant plants out there. So you know, gardening for pollinators and gardening with native plants, you get to see a lot of the cycle of life from birth to death. And I came home a couple of years ago in the fall and found this chrysalis. This is buttonbush that it's on. And so I found this chrysalis. I looked it up. I figured out it was some type of silkworm or silk moth. And so I said, well, I'll check back in, you know, in the springtime when it closes and see what happens. And so I came home from work the one day, and there sat this beautiful female Promethea moth, I think this is. And she sat there and just sat there and sat there. And then a little later, this male came along, and well, you know, you can kind of figure out what's going on there. And this is their baby. And, you know, this was a couple weeks later. This is again on the same button bush. And just a really wonderful moment in life to witness. And the other thing you want to witness this for is I'm going to give you your Zen moment of the day, where we have a caterpillar just eating a leaf in my garden. And you know, I set up a chair, I got my camera out, I put the camera on a tripod, and I just sat there and said, you know, I kind of enjoy watching this caterpillar eat. And you know, my blood pressure went down, my stress levels went down, I was kind of meditating. And you know, I have a client down in Springfield who actually used to suffer from migraine headaches, now goes out in her garden 15 minutes a day and meditates, and she hasn't had a migraine headache in a long, long time. So something to keep in mind if you suffer from those. But oh, there he is. And you know, you start to get cute little bunnies like this. And again, you know, he's down on the bottom level and eating the little greenery that we have down here. And don't get upset if the bunnies eat your native plants. That's what happens in a native plant garden. You're feeding the native fauna. So here's Raoul again. And if you know, like I was saying, if you get it all right and you attract enough life to your garden, you get some Raouls showing up. And if you're lucky enough, like I was, you get to watch Raoul sleep in your front yard, which is kind of a fun moment in life. And you know, I'd never dreamed of having an owl that I got to know. But you can tell, obviously, I'm very close to him. He doesn't seem to be bothered by us at all. And it's fun to watch him hunt. It's really fun. They're really super stealthy. And so it's a fun thing to do. And again, you know, the great thing about native plants is we live in a temperate climate. You know, we're in the north. We have spring, summer, winter, and fall. My wife is Ecuadorian, and they basically have rainy season and not rainy season. But things are always blooming, things are always doing their thing. I like seasonal interest myself because you know, it can be really, really beautiful. These are a few of my favorite monardas. Here's our spotted horseman again, the Monarda punctata. This is Monarda fistulosa, wild bergamot, which I think is a great plant. I use it a lot. Again, it's kind of a short-lived plant, but if you spread the seeds around, you'll have it forever. A combination here that I like to use, you know, this is a very sunny garden. This is the Monarda fistulosa wild bergamot. This is the same plant, but you can see some genetic diversity here. You know, people talk a lot about cultivars versus straight species. And one way you can tell you have a straight species is if there's some genetic variation. You know, I have a brother, but we don't look exactly alike. We look very closely related, but we don't look exactly alike. Mountain mint over here on the left-hand side is probably your number one plant for pollinators. Again, this is more of a Midwestern native, but I tried this in a landscape because a client wanted me to do a blue garden. And so I was trying to get as much close to blue as I could. This is Penstemon grandiflora, or the big flowered penstemon, big flowered beard tongue, sorry. And this is our native iris, blue flag iris, Iris virginica, growing with it. And then I think we had some Amsonia and some Stocacia planted with it as well. But the client on the right here limited me to white, green, and blue flowers in her garden. And so you can see the white of the mountain mint up here, and we've got some elderberries, the bergamot that kind of mixed in well with that, and then anise hyssop down here. And again, this blooms all summer long, changes as it goes. Don't forget to combine and contrast textures in the garden. Juxtaposition of form is really a key in landscape design. You know, you're seeing some little blue stem here, probably my favorite ornamental grass. Really, really beautiful through the summer. And then all winter long is just outstanding. Feeds a lot of songbirds, feeds a lot of insects. A lot of insects will overwinter in these. A lot of rabbits will overwinter in little blue stem as well. We've got rattlesnake master here with the little balls. And so I kind of like this juxtaposition of form. The rattlesnake master has these strap-like foliage down at its base. It has a basal rosette, and just a really cool looking plant. And these two together to me are really outstanding. I love them a lot. So we talked about the hardy argyratum a little beforehand. Very invasive plant. It's a native. So I kind of let it go. I use it for bigger properties where you need it to kind of roam and mix itself in between things. When we were talking about planting matrices before, this is kind of what you're looking at. You've got, you know, switchgrass and you've got some bone set, but then you've got this hardy ageratum kind of working its way in between them and at a different level. So again, you've got different levels, different layers, lots of food going on. Oh, we just lost our lights again. So I always like to say falls for asters. You know, it's that time of year when everything everybody thinks everything's shutting down, but native landscapes are just kind of getting going. And again, this all ties into migration. And, you know, there's thousands of insects that migrate south for the winter. And, you know, they need food along the way. We've got some Liatris microcephala here, which is a small-headed Liatris. I'm not sure which aster this is, probably Ericoides. I'm not positive. Heath aster. This is goldenrod in the back. This is rough goldenrod, Solidago rugosa. And again, you know, some of our springtime plants like this blue flag iris become fall plants as they change color. You know, our ornamental, our native grasses, our native ornamental grasses really put on a show in the fall. So it's a nice thing to incorporate into the landscape. And the other thing that I kind of like to show in this picture is I went to a client's house the one day and I said, look, if you don't water that plant tomorrow, it's gonna, or by the end of the day, it's gonna die. And they didn't, and it died. And that's this dead looking thing here, but it doesn't really look dead. It just looks like another part of the landscape. It was a goldenrod. It was in its first year getting established. And so it just got a little too dry and choked. But we left it in the landscape until the next spring, because again, it housed some insects, it fed some insects, and death is a part of the landscape. And so you kind of have to go along with that sometimes. And then, you know, fall again. These are river birch, really one of my favorite plants for fall landscape interest, especially if you plant it with some native grasses. These are oak leaf hydrangea here, which get really beautiful fall and winter color. These are some Amsonias in front, which really aren't native to Virginia. Again, it's one of those plants that I use because of having a lot of pollinator habitat to them. And again, as things are changing, you know, that's probably going to migrate a little further north. So, you know, don't be afraid to think outside the box, and you know, especially think about seasonal interest. But we can do better than what we've been doing, and that should be easy. If your house looks like this, I'm sorry, I don't mean to insult your look, but we can do better. You know, let's have less lawn in the landscape. Let's not prune things into a box. Let's use less fossil fuel maintenance. That means fewer leaf blowers, fewer weed whackers, fewer lawn mowers, all those things. Let's see more butterflies. Let's get more birds out in the landscape, and don't prune things into a box again. You know, I guarantee you, if you start planting some native plants out in your landscape, you're going to start seeing a lot of other things that come along with it. And I always refer to them as the flying flowers that come free with your native plants that you just bought. And it's a good thing. And I just wanted to tell everybody, you know, Nancy mentioned it in the beginning, but this year Cullowhee will be virtual. And so just like tonight's webinar, there should be no reason to not attend. And you won't have this much fun attending virtually, but you know, maybe in a future year where you can go down and join us for Cullowhee. And Chewy would like to say thank you. Now go plant some native plants, go pet your dog, and go call your mom.
Well, thank you, John. Really enjoyed listening to you there and all your beautiful pictures. I forgot to add in your introduction the Native Plant podcast that you do host. So tune into the Native Plant podcast there. He has the URL right there. So right now we're going to take questions. And if you have a question for John, please add it to the Q&A panel that you'll find at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Don't use the chat and don't use the raise your hand. Use the Q&A. And Margaret Fisher will be your host for the Q&A portion. So Margaret, can you share the first question for John now? Thank you.
Yes, I sure will. And I just wanted to ask myself, John, I'm always struck when I hear your incredibly wonderful talks and see your photos that you teach me two things each time, and see if you agree with this. One is hardscape before landscape, and the other is it looks great when you plant things en masse. Does that sound about right?
Yeah. You know, we do a lot of master planning with people, and so they always ask us, you know, where should we start? And I always say, get the hardscaping out of the way first, because you know, you got to get a little brutal doing hardscaping, whether it's a stone wall or a flagstone patio. You're moving some heavy stuff in and out, and so you don't want to walk over your plants doing so. So always good to get the heavy lifting out of the way first. Mass planting, yes, the human eye is drawn to kind of simplicity, for lack of a better word. And so the bigger a mass of things that humans see, the more they tend to like it. It's not necessarily the best thing for the environment. The environment is doing more biodiversity. And the reason for that is if you have a mass of pacanthamum or whatever you have, corn is to me the best example. If you have a monoculture of 1,000 acres of corn and you get army worms that invade your corn, well, there's nothing to stop them from reaching the other side of that 1,000-acre field. And so you're going to lose your entire crop of corn unless you treat with something that kills that bug. However, if you've got a big, rich, diverse landscape, maybe one of your black-eyed Susan gets sick, but it doesn't affect the rest of the black-eyed Susans on the other side of the planting. So that's kind of the basis for massing versus non-massing.
Okay. We have a lot of really terrific questions. I know we have to finish at 8 at the latest. So I'm going to do my best here, and I'm going to try to start with questions that are a little bit more general and leave till later, if we have time, things that are like, which exact plant was that you mentioned? One question was, how do you maintain this type of gardening and planting? At what point do you need to thin things out so they don't choke each other out?
It's a good question. It's a tough answer, and a lot of us in the field are talking about having some symposiums on maintenance, specifically on maintenance, because that's kind of the real problem in the industry at the moment. Is we have all these guys out there who are trained to cut everything into a box and hit everything with poison, and then we come in and give them a complicated landscape that they don't necessarily understand. There's I would say educating yourself is the best way to maintain things so that you know what the plants are. In my case, I figured it was easier to teach the guys 10 bad plants than to teach them 50 good plants. And so that's what we've done, is focused on, well, this is a bad plant. When you see this plant, get rid of it. And, Japanese honeysuckle is an example. If we see Japanese honeysuckle starting to get established in the planting, well, we get in there, we rip it out. But you're under constant attack, basically. Especially here in Northern Virginia, we've got a lot of non-native invasive species and that's mainly what you are maintaining against. If we didn't have those invasive species, then native plantings would maintain themselves.
Is there an issue with native plants choking each other out?
Yeah, you can. I don't notice that it happens as much. Native plants are kind of weird in the fact that they're not really cultivated plants. We haven't been cultivating native plants for very long. You can go to Japan and you can find a Rhodia japonica that will fit into a certain size and a certain shape and all of these things, because they've been cultivating plants for thousands of years. So you still get wild results from native plants. You're planting wildflowers, you're going to get wild results. But I don't know that we particularly thin anything out. What we notice in the native landscape is that it moves around. You might have planted purple coneflower over here last year, and it might be coming up over here this year. That kind of stuff happens all the time. And so you do have to kind of edit and, just select where you're going to fight your battles in a native plant landscape.
Okay. We had a few questions about grasses and sedges. So they're basically wondering what suggestions you might have.
They're great. I would highly encourage everyone who has a non-native grass in their landscape to pull it out and replace it with a native one. Miscanthus grass is one of our worst, non-native invasive species. You see them popping up all over Tyson's Corner and around Philadelphia. It's just a mess. And Pennisetum is the other kind of non-native trash plant, I'll call it. But people like them because they do the right thing at the right time and the perfect size and the shape and all that stuff. But I like panicums a lot, the switchgrasses, and there's a lot of cultivars of those. So you have some choices. If you want a shorter one that behaves a certain way, that exists. There's one called Heavy Metal that I like really well just because of the name, but it's blue. So you have a bluish color. There's one called Shenandoah, which gets really big and is just beautiful in the fall. So gives you some selections to choose from there. Little Blue Stem is another one that I mentioned earlier in the talk. Again, there's a ton of cultivars coming out of that plant. So if you did want something that was a little more predictably behaved, you could use those. I use one called Standing Ovation a lot, and I use another one called the Blues a lot. But I'll use the straight species of any of those guys as well. But a lot of times people are kind of asking you for a specific thing. Prairie drop seed is a native grass that I like, Spirabolus heterolapsus, and that's kind of my Pennisetum replacement. Sedges is a totally different thing. There's lots of cool ones out there. They are blowing up on the trade at the moment. Carex is a genus that is just going wild in the trade. I use Carex pennsylvanica a lot, which is oak sedge. And sedges more are geared towards shade, where grasses are more geared towards sun. There's exceptions to that, of course, but as a general rule of thumb, sedges for the shade, grasses for the sun. There's a sedge that I used recently called Carex radiata, and I forget the common name of it, but really fantastic plant, and has done really well for me. Beautiful.
Okay. Right, and to change the subject, how much soil preparation do you do when you start these gardens from scratch?
It depends, really. I would suggest everybody test their garden soil. The master gardeners, I think, will do it for free, or 10 or 15 bucks or something. It's relatively inexpensive. But you take some soil samples, you fill out a form saying what you want to grow, you send it off, and they tell you, oh, you need to do this. In general, we do very little preparation ourselves, and the reason for that is when I started in the trade, we would go in and rototill the soil. We'd add in a bunch of leaf mulch. We'd rototill again. We'd have this really soft, really plantable soil, and the plants loved it. But there's a couple of things with that you have to be careful of. Is that you don't want to be disturbing the root structures of any trees or anything like that. And there's a certain chemistry in the soil with mycorrhizal associations and whatnot that, again, you can be kind of churning up when you do the rototilling stuff. So the main reason we do very little soil prep, though, is because of invasive species. If you go through and you rototill that land, you're bringing all those weed seeds up, and invasive species really thrive on disturbance. And so you go in and you disturb an area, you're almost automatically fighting, with the landscape. And that's not a good thing to do. You don't want to do that. So keep it to a minimum. Prep what you need to. We prep the holes a little bit. But the first, when we did Tippecanoe, we rototilled all that. And it was a mess the following year with invasives. And then when we did Ashburn Lake the following year, we just prepped holes and didn't do any soil prep, and we had a lot better results with weed control. But it can vary, and it varies, situation to situation.
Would that be true even on construction soil, like a new project?
Construction soil, you pretty much have to do some things, and sometimes you may have to get a chisel plow in there and go in deep and break up the soil and all those things. But yeah, a lot of times in new construction sites, they've hauled off the topsoil and sold it to somebody and left you with something less than desirable. But again, if you're testing that soil, you can kind of go, oh, okay, we've got no nitrogen whatsoever. Okay, we got to do something to fix that. I would highly recommend organics for soil prep, composted leaves are pretty readily available in almost any municipality. So.
Great. All right, so changing the subject again. How can we make native landscaping more accessible to young, full-time employed and/or low-income people?
Well, it's happening. Again, when I started doing this 30 years ago, people really, I would ask someone, where's that plant native to? And they didn't really think about it or anything. So a change is happening. And the whole green movement we're seeing all over the States, I think is also spreading to landscaping. And so, the biggest thing I say is the more good examples we have out there, the better. If you have pretty pictures of pretty landscapes that were made with native plants, people will look at that and go, oh, I want to do that. But, if you have kind of a hot mess that you're making out in the backyard, that's probably not going to win as many people over. And with the underprivileged, what I would say is encouraging food gardens is a way. And there's a lot of edible plants like serviceberry and blueberries. It'd be awesome if a kid could walk out his backyard and just pick some blueberries off of some bushes and have a good time eating them.
That would be awesome. All right, so we had several questions wanting a little bit more advice about dealing in an HOA situation. So for example, do you have any recommendations for clauses to be added to contracts?
I don't know that I do, but I can just kind of give some general thoughts. I've had ups and downs with HOAs. The problem with an HOA is like anything you do with a lot of people, you get a lot of opinions, and you get that opinion from the person who knows everything and thinks they have it all figured out to the person who's just there to learn and be helpful. So my first suggestion would be, if you're interested in your HOA's landscaping, get on their landscaping committee so that you can actively participate in what happens in their landscaping. I was in Ashburn this winter and was walking around with their landscaping committee, and one of them said to me, well, we'd like to use natives where we can. And I was like really perplexed by that statement. I was like, well, when can you not use a native, and why would you even think that way? Why wouldn't the native plant be the first go-to thing that you would go to? I love Asian magnolias myself, but they're a frustrating tree. They get burned every spring by a late frost. But if you put a redbud out there, you'd have surefire flowers every year, and it'd be a wonderful thing. So I would just pick natives first. The other thing I would tell you is that we had an issue in Ashburn where the board changed, and they had an entirely different mindset of how they tried to get our native plant maintenance to fit into the same square box that the cut them into a box maintenance was doing. And it just really, it was a couple of years of really just being frustrated and trying to educate. But when you're trying to educate to people who are just not listening to you, it gets really tough. And so I kind of went around the back and got the committee members and said, hey, you got to help me out here. We've got to keep these gardens nice. And so things have changed around a bit, but there's still work to be done. And again, get involved in local politics. All politics are local, as they say, and being a board member of your HOA can help you determine what kind of landscape you're going to have.
We had a few questions about winter interest and evergreens and how there are not that many evergreens. What's your take on the few evergreen issue?
I say own it. You know, we live in a temperate climate. You know what's wrong with having you know, what you're seeing behind me. They don't get that in the tropics. You know, you don't see fall in the tropics. You don't see spring in the tropics. Would you give all that up to have a few more evergreens? I wouldn't. And again, we've just been kind of brainwashed into thinking that winter interest means evergreen, but to me it means sumacs, you know, and their seed heads and their fall color, and it means perennial landscapes with their seed heads, their colors, their stalks. You know, we just need to retrain our eye a little bit to welcome the temperate zone a little bit more, welcome ourselves back home. Nothing wrong with having some evergreens, and there's nothing wrong with throwing a few boxwood into your landscape. But again, you know, think of that 70% number, and if you want to have a couple of hinoki cypresses outside your door, you know, I'm not going to come hunting for you or anything.
Well, speaking of winter, one or two people were asking about the observation that in the perennial area or meadow area, when the plants all die in the winter, you're left with bare soil, and do they control the erosion even in the winter?
Well, you're not left with bare soil. First off, you're left with the plants. You know, the plants are going to live there, and that's why I was saying there's lots of very attractive seed heads in the wintertime. There's lots of attractive foliage on herbaceous plants in the winter, and yeah, the plant is still alive, so its roots are still in the ground, and its roots, you know, there's definitely proof and definitely studies about how much better soil is held by native plants than by non-natives. You've probably all seen pictures of the diagram of like a lawn has 4 or 5 inches of roots that go in it, but a native meadow has roots that go down 30, 40 feet. That's a much better system for holding soil than grass.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
We have just a minute or two, so if you have a really quick question, Margaret,
All right, this is a quick question.
thank you.
And relevant right now. Should I treat tent caterpillars?
I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know that tent caterpillars are native or not.
They are.
They are? Then
Yeah.
I wouldn't treat them. They are bird food, I'm sure. And I don't know that they kill the trees that they occupy. They're unsightly, you know, they're you know, people don't like to look at them, but at the same time, if they're not going to kill your tree and they are going to feed the chickadees, I'd say feed the chickadees.
They won't kill the tree. Well,
Yeah.
thank you, John. I'm going to turn it back over to Nancy. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, John. And I've always heard that tent caterpillars are beloved by black-billed cuckoos. So the cuckoos, or yellow-billed cuckoos, any cuckoo bird, so they like them.
Nice.
Okay, so again, thank you, John, and farewell. You can walk off into the dolly sods there. Enjoy yourself.
Thank you all.
Thank you. So that's all the time we had for questions. Thank you, everyone, for participating in the spring presentations of the Landscaping with Virginia Natives webinar series. Join us again in the fall, and we have another 6 webinars. You already signed up for all of them, so your $10 goes for a lot of webinars. The fall series begins Wednesday, September 1st, with a presentation by Nancy Lawson. She's the author of The Humane Gardener. Also watch for recording. You'll get an email about the recordings of this webinar. And you'll also get another email about a survey about the webinar series. So I hope that you will answer the survey and honestly and give us your opinions and ideas, and we'd really appreciate that. So with that, good night and many thanks for planting many Virginia natives.
That tree can come from.